The night was still. Los Angeles slept beneath a sky that knew little of what was coming. In a quiet industrial district just east of downtown, stacks of cash sat waiting, tens of millions of dollars worth, unguarded in a vault that would soon become the stage for one of the most audacious crimes in American history. At the heart of it was a man who knew exactly how to walk right through the front door, because he had already done it 1,000 times. Alan Pace III was no stranger at the Dunbar Armored facility. As a regional safety inspector, he'd walked its corridors, studied its cameras, memorized its guards' patterns, and photographed its layout. To outsiders, he was just another employee, even liked by some. But inside, he was quietly plotting what would become the largest cash robbery in the United States to that point. A day before the heist, fate played its own role in the plan. Pace was fired, officially for tampering with company vehicles, but he had already moved through every room of that building in his mind. Losing his job didn't slow him down. It accelerated him. He invited 5 childhood friends, men he'd grown up with, into a scheme that would change their lives forever. Eric Damon Boyd, Eugene Lamar Hill Jr., Freddie Lynn McCrary Jr., Terry Wayne Brown Sr., and Thomas Lee Johnson. The evening of September 12, 1997 began like any other for those friends. They met at a house party in Long Beach, loud music, laughter, people unaware of the plan bubbling underneath. But this wasn't just a party. It was a carefully constructed alibi. They mingled, joked, and made sure their names would be tied to normalcy when the clock struck midnight. Then, quietly, 6 men slipped away. At 12:30 a.m., they reached the Dunbar Armored Depot on Mateo Street. Using keys Pace had kept, they let themselves in. Cameras were bypassed because Alan had timed them down to the second. Inside, the cafeteria was still. 2 guards, finishing their meals, didn't know something was wrong until they were surrounded. In less than a minute, the men were bound with duct tape, faces down, unable to raise the alarm. They didn't need violence. They didn't fire a single shot. What they needed was precision, the knowledge that every Friday night, the vault was left open because vast sums of money were regularly sorted and transferred. Alan knew exactly which bags held the highest denominations. He knew where the recording devices were hidden and took them. For the next 30 minutes, the 6 men loaded cash into metal carts, wheeling them beyond where anyone would think to look, into a rented U-Haul truck waiting in the dock. By the time the sun's first light hinted at dawn, $18.9 million, basically a small fortune, was gone. At the time, that amount was larger than any cash robbery in U.S. history. Then, like shadows, they returned to the party. People danced unaware. The 6 slipped back into the crowd, brushing off questions about where they'd been. For the next 2 years, law enforcement would be stumped. The crime scene yielded only a tiny clue, a broken piece of plastic from a U-Haul taillight. That was hardly enough to nail down a crime of such magnitude. They were careful with their money. No lavish spending sprees. A bit of cash went to property, cars, businesses, and investments designed to look legitimate. They created shell companies and used complex schemes to hide the source. At one point, they even hired a Los Angeles immigration attorney and an office manager to help funnel the money. Both would later be arrested for money laundering. For a while, it seemed like the perfect crime. But perfection can't survive human error. In 1999, Eugene Hill made a mistake that would unravel everything. Trying to buy property, he handed a real estate broker a stack of bills, still wrapped in branded currency straps. Straps that would forever link the cash to Dunbar Armored. The broker grew suspicious and went to the police. Suddenly, the nearly invisible trail of cash had a bright, glaring shimmer. Investigators dusted off old records and discovered something familiar. Hill had rented a U-Haul exactly the size and model whose taillight had been found at the crime scene. Under questioning, Hill confessed, and in doing so, named the others. The trial that followed was a media sensation. Alan Pace maintained his innocence, even claiming his former friends framed him out of revenge. But prosecutors had built an airtight case. Pace was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Boyd, with a prior record and a gun used in the robbery, received 17 years. The others got sentences ranging from 8 to 10 years. 2 men caught laundering money were sentenced to about 2.5 years each. Yet despite convictions, the story doesn't end with the echoes of a gavel. Of the nearly $19 million taken that night, only about $5 million was ever recovered. Roughly $13.9 million remains unaccounted for, hidden somewhere in the fabric of everyday life, in property titles, shell businesses, or perhaps long-forgotten bank accounts. To this day, no one truly knows where that money ended up. What began as the blueprint of the perfect crime ended instead as a cautionary tale, a story of ambition and loyalty, of greed and recklessness. These were not hardened criminals. They were men whose greatest mistake was believing they could outsmart every system, every camera, every law, every investigator, simply because they knew the building better than anyone else. The Dunbar Armored robbery stands as one of the boldest, most meticulously planned heists in American criminal history. Not because it was violent, but because it was clever, hidden in plain sight, and undone by a single moment of human fallibility. And somewhere out there, the rest of that vanished fortune might still be waiting.